My family called me a failure at reunion. They didn't know I secretly bought their company. The humid summer air hung heavy, thick with the cloying scent of grilled meat and the even heavier weight of his family's collective judgment. Uncle Theron, a man whose presence always seemed to expand to fill whatever room he occupied, stood at the head of the long oak table, a glass of amber liquid clutched in his hand. His booming laughter, usually a sign of good cheer, now carried a distinct edge, aimed squarely at Kaelen. His cousins, some with faint concern, others with thinly veiled amusement, shifted their gazes his way. They thought they knew him, the quiet, eccentric Kaelen, the one who had strayed from the path. They thought this was just another family reunion where his perceived failures would be put on display. They thought they had him cornered, vulnerable. But as Theron's voice rose, punctuating his derision with a dismissive wave of his hand, Kaelen simply met his gaze, a quiet hum of satisfaction vibrating beneath his ribs. They saw a man defeated. Kaelen saw a stage perfectly set. The final piece of his intricate puzzle was about to fall into place. His journey to that sun-drenched patio, enduring the familiar sting of his family's disdain, began almost 2 decades ago, rooted in a fundamental divergence of vision. The family business, Theron Industries, was a behemoth of manufacturing, a legacy built on steel and concrete, tradition and control. From his earliest days, Kaelen was expected to follow the well-worn path, to apprentice under Uncle Theron, to eventually inherit a piece of this industrial empire. The clatter of machinery, the roar of furnaces, the smell of grease and metal, these were the expected sensory inputs of his childhood, the sounds and scents of his ordained future. Yet, even as a child, his mind gravitated not to the physical might of industry but to the quiet hum of computers, the elegant logic of code. He found solace in the intricate patterns of circuit boards, the precise commands that brought digital worlds to life. He saw a world transforming, a shift from tangible assets to intangible algorithms, from physical labor to intellectual property. His family, however, saw only deviation, a puzzling disinterest in the very foundation of their prosperity. He remembered a particular afternoon when, at the age of 10, he had meticulously rewired an old VCR, bypassing a broken component with a clever circuit he designed himself. His father, a man burdened by tradition and a deep respect for Uncle Theron's opinion, had merely shaken his head. "That's clever, son, but it's not building anything real. Real work is in the factory where you can feel the heat, smell the metal." The unspoken comparison was always Theron Industries. A year later, Kaelen had spent weeks immersed in a basic programming language, creating a simple game. He'd shown it to Uncle Theron, hoping for a flicker of recognition, perhaps even pride. Theron had peered at the screen, then chuckled, a sound that always carried a hint of condescension when aimed at Kaelen's pursuits. He had called Kaelen's interests frivolous, unfocused, a distraction from real work. He had always emphasized the solidity of steel over the ephemeral nature of code, the certainty of a tangible product over the abstract logic of software. The memory of Theron's dismissive wave, coupled with his father's resigned sigh, solidified Kaelen's quiet resolve. He would prove them wrong, not with words but with undeniable results. The decision to attend a university renowned for its computer science program rather than the prestigious business school favored by his family was met with a chorus of disapproval that echoed through every family dinner for months. His mother, caught between her son's aspirations and her husband's expectations, had tried to mediate, suggesting a compromise, perhaps a double major. But Kaelen's conviction was absolute. He saw the business school as a path back to the very system he instinctively recoiled from. At university, immersed in the world of algorithms and networks, Kaelen thrived. He spent countless hours in the computer labs, fueled by cheap coffee and an insatiable curiosity. He excelled in complex problem-solving, his mind naturally dissecting systems and identifying efficiencies. While his peers focused on conventional career paths, Kaelen sought out professors who dabbled in emerging fields like machine learning and financial modeling. He felt a profound sense of liberation, a quiet joy in building, creating, and understanding systems that were truly his own. When Kaelen declined the internship at Theron Industries during his summers, choosing instead to intern at nascent tech startups, the murmurs turned to outright accusations of disloyalty. The first summer, he worked at a small fintech company, learning the intricacies of high-frequency trading systems. The second, he joined a startup focused on predictive analytics for supply chains, inadvertently gaining insights into the very inefficiencies that plagued traditional manufacturing, like Theron Industries. Each summer, the questions from his family grew sharper. "Still playing with those online games, Kaelen?" Uncle Theron would quip at holiday gatherings, his booming voice designed to draw attention to Kaelen's perceived folly. "When are you going to get a real job, a real future?" The implication was always that his choices were temporary, a youthful indulgence he would eventually grow out of. His relationship with Uncle Theron, in particular, became a microcosm of this ideological clash. Theron embodied everything Kaelen sought to escape: the rigid hierarchy, the resistance to innovation, the belief that worth was measured solely by one's position within the established order. Theron saw Kaelen's quiet nature as weakness, his independent path as rebellion. He would often lecture Kaelen, not gently but with a patronizing tone, about the importance of roots, of legacy, of understanding where true power lies. He believed deeply in the tangible, the visible, the things that could be counted and controlled. Kaelen's world, one of abstract code and networked possibilities, was beyond Theron's comprehension and therefore, in his eyes, insignificant. Theron would sometimes attempt to explain the steel-making process or the logistics of their shipping network, his hands gesturing grandly, expecting Kaelen to be impressed by the sheer scale. Kaelen would listen politely, his mind already dissecting the inefficiencies, imagining automated solutions and wondering why they hadn't adopted them years ago. The sacrifices Kaelen made were not financial in those early years, but social and emotional. Family gatherings became gauntlets, each conversation a subtle interrogation about his real job, his stability, his future. His achievements, however small or significant, were dismissed or reframed to fit their narrative of his wandering. When he landed his first major role at a promising tech company specializing in data analytics for financial markets, it was met with a scoff from Theron, who declared, "It's not Theron Industries, is it?" The implication was clear: anything outside their orbit was inherently lesser. Kaelen remembered his mother's worried frown, his father's strained attempt to change the subject, and the collective pitying glances from his cousins. He felt the sting, but beneath it, a quiet resolve hardened. Their underestimation was a cloak, a perfect disguise for the ambition simmering within him. But it was precisely this constant underestimation that became Kaelen's greatest asset. While they saw a dreamer, Kaelen was a strategist. While they dismissed his coding as trivial, Kaelen saw it as a foundation. His secret weapon wasn't just his intellect, it was their ignorance. They had no idea that while they were busy maintaining an outdated empire, Kaelen was quietly building an entirely new one, piece by meticulous piece. He had always been a master of observation, a quiet analyst of human behavior. He understood that their dismissals were not born of malice, but of a deep-seated belief in their own antiquated paradigm. This belief, this ingrained tunnel vision, was his greatest ally. His path diverged sharply. He didn't chase venture capital for his own startups, choosing instead to remain an employee for several years, building capital and an unparalleled understanding of the financial landscape. Instead, Kaelen cultivated a deep understanding of market dynamics, learned to identify undervalued assets, and leveraged his engineering mindset to build automated trading algorithms that could execute complex strategies with unparalleled speed and precision. He started small, with personal savings, and meticulously compounded his gains. He lived frugally, invested aggressively, and learned to manage risk with the cold, calculating logic of a machine. His tech skills allowed him to see patterns where others saw chaos, to predict shifts that others missed. He didn't need their approval, he needed their blind spots. He spent late nights refining his models, testing hypotheses, and optimizing his trading strategies. Each successful trade, each compounded gain, was not just financial growth, but a silent rebellion against the limitations his family had tried to impose. He was building his own fortress, not of steel, but of data and capital. And then he found it. The Achilles heel of Theron Industries. Not a single, glaring flaw, but a series of interconnected vulnerabilities born from their very resistance to change. Their reliance on outdated infrastructure, their slow adoption of new technologies, their rigid management structure, their inability to pivot in a rapidly evolving market. These weren't just inefficiencies. They were opportunities. Kaelen remembered a fleeting conversation a few years prior at a Christmas gathering, where his cousin David, who worked in the accounting department, had complained about the company's archaic inventory system and the endless manual reconciliation. Theron, overhearing, had simply barked, "It's worked for 50 years, David. Why fix what isn't broken?" While Theron scoffed at digital transformation, Kaelen saw the cracks forming in the foundation of his seemingly impenetrable empire. He realized Theron's dismissiveness wasn't just about Kaelen. It was a fundamental flaw in his leadership, a blind spot that threatened the very survival of the legacy he so cherished. The idea, initially a fleeting thought of poetic justice, solidified into a concrete, meticulously detailed plan. What if Kaelen didn't just build his own empire, but took ownership of the one they so proudly guarded, the one they so carelessly dismissed his worth within? It was a poetic form of vindication, a strategic masterpiece in the making. His goal wasn't just wealth. It was leverage. It was control. It was the ultimate demonstration that their traditional metrics of success were, in Kaelen's estimation, obsolete. The initial seed of this plan was planted years ago, nurtured in silence, watered with every patronizing remark and dismissive glance. He was not just building wealth. He was gathering intelligence, understanding their weaknesses, and preparing to exploit them with surgical precision. His silent accumulation of capital was merely the fuel for the coming revolution. He began to systematically analyze public filings of Theron Industries, dissecting their quarterly reports, their annual statements, their competitive landscape. He built financial models not just for his own trading, but specifically for the acquisition, running simulations, stress testing various scenarios. The plan, once fully conceived, was a multifaceted operation requiring immense patience and discretion. Kaelen knew haste would invite scrutiny. His first step was to diversify his investment portfolio, generating liquid capital that wouldn't draw immediate attention. He continued to work in tech, lending an air of normalcy to his life, while his real work took place in the quiet hours, behind layers of encryption and through a network of trusted, discreet financial advisors. He studied Theron Industries not as a relative, but as an analyst, dissecting its financials, its market position, its debt structure, its shareholder base. He noted their stagnant growth, their reliance on legacy contracts, their dwindling market share in emerging sectors. It was, in essence, a slowly sinking ship, despite Theron's bluster. He observed how their outdated sales strategies were failing to capture new clients, how their manufacturing processes were less efficient than their competitors, and how their management, steeped in tradition, resisted any meaningful change. Kaelen's primary strategy involved the quiet acquisition of shares on the open market, specifically targeting smaller, less significant blocks held by passive investors or those looking to divest without making waves. This was a painstaking process, spread over several years, designed to avoid triggering any alarms within the company or among the major shareholders. He utilized shell corporations, blind trusts, and an intricate web of intermediaries across various jurisdictions, each transaction meticulously structured to be below the radar, never revealing a single ultimate beneficial owner. His software engineering background proved invaluable here, allowing him to build custom data analytics tools that could identify ideal purchase opportunities and predict market reactions with uncanny accuracy. He saw patterns of ownership, vulnerabilities in the shareholder registry, and opportunities to buy when the stock price dipped for unrelated, macroeconomic reasons, masking his activities within broader market volatility. He even anticipated market rumors, creating noise to distract from his true intentions. Theron, of course, remained blissfully unaware. His attention was always on the grand pronouncements, the public image, the major deals. He prided himself on his control, but his control was only over what he could see, what he could physically touch. He never looked beneath the surface, never considered the possibility that a silent, methodical campaign was being waged against his perceived dominion. He would occasionally hear whispers of a new, aggressive buyer in the market, but he dismissed them as opportunistic hedge funds, never imagining the truth. Just vultures circling, he'd grumble at board meetings, confident in the impenetrable fortress he believed Theron Industries to be. He'd scoff at the financial reports that showed stagnant growth, attributing it to market cycles or digital fads, never to the fundamental issues Kaelen had identified. The more shares Kaelen accumulated, the more confident he became in his strategy. He began to identify key institutional investors who held significant, yet non-controlling, stakes in Theron Industries. These were pension funds, mutual funds, and large asset managers who prioritized returns over legacy, entities with no emotional attachment to the Theron name. Kaelen's network of financial intermediaries subtly approached them, testing the waters, gauging their willingness to sell if the price was right. The company's stagnant performance made them receptive. They were looking for an exit, and Kaelen was prepared to offer them one, at a premium that made it irresistible, yet not so high as to draw undue scrutiny from regulators or the broader market. The final, decisive block of shares came from a pension fund that had been holding Theron Industries stock for decades, but was desperate to offload underperforming assets. The negotiation was swift and discreet, handled by a team Kaelen had meticulously vetted for their discretion and expertise. As the cumulative percentage of Kaelen's ownership crept upwards, Theron's arrogance predictably swelled. He saw Kaelen's continued absence from the family business as a testament to his own foresight, proof that his traditional path was the only path to true success. He would often use Kaelen's name in family discussions as a cautionary tale. "Look at Kaelen," he'd say, not unkindly, but with a heavy dose of pity. "Talented boy, but he just can't settle. No roots, no real future." Each pronouncement, each dismissive wave of his hand, was a subtle confirmation that Kaelen's invisibility was working. Theron perceived Kaelen's silence as a lack of achievement, his absence as irrelevance. He believed Kaelen had failed to launch, when in reality Kaelen was in orbit preparing for re-entry. His parents, though they never directly echoed Theron's words, carried a quiet anxiety about their son's choices, a worry that Kaelen keenly felt but chose not to address, knowing that only concrete action would alleviate it. Kaelen remembered a specific conversation with his cousin, David, a year prior to the reunion. David, burdened by the day-to-day realities of Theron Industries, was complaining about the company's slow progress, its inability to compete with newer, more agile firms. He described the frustration of trying to implement even minor technological upgrades, only to be met with resistance from senior management, often directly from Uncle Theron. Kaelen offered a few subtle suggestions, hinting at the potential of technological integrations, data-driven decision-making, and market diversification strategies that would allow the company to tap into new revenue streams. David, a loyal Theron Industries employee, listened politely, his expression a mixture of fatigue and resignation, then shrugged. "Uncle Theron says those are fads, Kaelen. We're in the business of making things, not chasing digital ghosts. He says our customers want reliability, not flashy software." Kaelen simply nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. They were so convinced of their own wisdom, so entrenched in their own perceived superiority, that they were blind to the very ground shifting beneath their feet. This pervasive, almost willful ignorance was Kaelen's greatest ally, allowing him to meticulously, methodically, and almost imperceptibly tighten his grip. The final pieces of his acquisition, the majority stake, were secured just weeks before the reunion, the paperwork filed through a labyrinthine network of shell corporations, finalized precisely when Kaelen knew it would cause the least amount of public disruption for his unveiling. The summer reunion was held, as it always was, at the family's sprawling lakeside estate. The air was thick with the scent of pine and privilege. Kaelen arrived on time, dressed simply, blending into the periphery, observing the familiar rituals. The casual greetings, the strained pleasantries, the subtle jockeying for position among the cousins. It was all a well-rehearsed play. He exchanged polite nods, offered perfunctory smiles, and waited. He knew the moment would come, as it always did. He watched his father, older now, still carrying the weight of his unfulfilled industrial dreams, engaging in a tired conversation with an older cousin about market downturns. He saw his mother, trying to appear cheerful, yet casting worried glances his way, perhaps anticipating the inevitable cross-examination from Theron. And come it did, after dinner, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Uncle Theron, emboldened by a few too many brandies and the captive audience, began his annual sermon. His eyes, already sparkling with self-satisfaction, found Kaelen's across the table. "Ah, Kaelen," he boomed, his voice cutting through the gentle hum of conversation. "Still chasing those intangible dreams, are we?" A few nervous chuckles rippled around the table. "You know, Kaelen, he sometimes wonders what Kaelen even does with his days. All that computer talk. Theron Industries, now that is real work. Tangible. Something you can touch, feel, build a legacy on." Theron's chest swelled with pride, his gaze sweeping across the table, soliciting agreement. "Cousin Sarah, Ever the well-meaning but misguided mediator chimed in. He's doing well, Uncle Theron. He's very clever with all that tech stuff. He worked for a big company in the city, didn't he, Kaelen? Theron scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Clever? Perhaps. But where's the substance? Where's the impact? We offered Kaelen a place here, a real future, a chance to be part of something significant. But he chose, what was it? Digital widgets. He chuckled again, a deep, rumbling sound of amusement at his own wit. You know, son, sometimes he worries Kaelen will wake up one day and realize he wasted his best years on a pipe dream. Theron Industries will still be here, strong and thriving, while his little ventures will be gone with the wind. Kaelen's father, bless his heart, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Kaelen's gaze. His mother offered a small, apologetic smile, a silent plea for Kaelen to just nod and let it pass. Other relatives chimed in, their comments a mixture of pity and thinly veiled judgment. He could have been such an asset, Aunt Carol sighed, as if discussing a lost cause. Such a shame. It's a shame. Really? Cousin Mark added, shaking his head. To turn your back on family like that. The chorus of well-intentioned but deeply wounding remarks continued. They recounted his missed opportunities, his stubborn independence, painting him as a cautionary tale of squandered potential. Theron, meanwhile, basked in the glow of his family's agreement, convinced of his own unassailable wisdom. When the comments finally began to wane, a lull in the conversation settled over the table, filled only by the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. This was his moment. Kaelen took a slow sip of water, allowing the silence to deepen, to draw every eye to him. His gaze remained calm, unwavering. Uncle Theron, Kaelen began, his voice calm, almost conversational, cutting through the residual tension. He has always valued legacy, hasn't he? An impact, and substance. Theron nodded, puffing out his chest. Indeed, Kaelen. Things Kaelen clearly doesn't understand. A smug smile played on his lips. Kaelen smiled, a genuine, unhurried smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Oh, but he does, Uncle. More than Theron knows. Kaelen paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing the Zygarnik effect to take hold, leaving them wanting the completion of his thought. Theron mentioned Theron Industries will still be here, strong and thriving, long after Kaelen's little ventures are gone with the wind. Theron's expression was one of smug superiority. Precisely. And Theron spoke of understanding where true power lies, Kaelen continued, his gaze steady, unwavering, holding Theron's eyes. Of being part of something significant. Theron leaned forward, a hint of impatience now creeping into his voice. Get to the point, Kaelen. What is it Kaelen wants to say? Kaelen leaned back, crossing his arms, his composure absolute. The point, Uncle, is that for the past several years, while Theron was busy dismissing Kaelen's intangible dreams and his digital widgets, Kaelen was busy. Very busy, in fact. He was busy identifying an asset that was undervalued, mismanaged, and ripe for a strategic acquisition. A flicker of confusion crossed Theron's face. Acquisition? What is Kaelen talking about? Kaelen is talking about legacy, Uncle, Kaelen stated, his voice gaining a quiet resonance that commanded attention. Kaelen is talking about impact. Kaelen is talking about true power. And Kaelen is talking about Theron Industries. A collective gasp swept through the table. Faces previously complacent or amused now contorted in confusion, then alarm. A nervous cough broke the silence, quickly suppressed. Theron scoffed, a nervous, disbelieving laugh. Kaelen? Kaelen bought. What? A few shares? Kaelen, don't be ridiculous. His voice was louder now, trying to regain control, but a tremor was undeniable. Kaelen reached into his inner jacket pocket, extracting a single, folded document. He laid it on the table, pushing it slowly towards Theron. Uncle Theron, and indeed, to all of you, allow Kaelen to formally introduce himself as the new chairman of the board and the majority shareholder of Theron Industries. His voice remained even, calm, devoid of triumph, purely factual. The acquisition was finalized 2 weeks ago. Kaelen now owns 51.3% of the company. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where laughter and judgment had been moments before. It was a silence so profound, Kaelen could hear the distant chirping of crickets, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Every eye was on him, then on the document, then back to him, searching for any hint of a joke, a trick. Uncle Theron's face, which moments before had been flushed with confidence, drained of all color. His jaw sagged, his eyes wide, glazed over with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. He stared at the document, then at Kaelen, then back at the document, his hands trembling slightly. This is impossible, he whispered, the booming voice reduced to a mere wheeze. Kaelen doesn't have the capital. Kaelen doesn't have the wherewithal. On the contrary, Uncle, Kaelen replied, his voice still measured. Kaelen had precisely what was needed. And more importantly, he had the foresight, the patience, and the strategic vision to execute it. While Theron was focused on the past, Kaelen was investing in the future. His board, perhaps tired of the stagnant growth and lack of innovation, was quite receptive to Kaelen's offer. A generous offer, Kaelen might add. His cousins, their smug expressions replaced by utter shock, exchanged bewildered glances. David, who had dismissed Kaelen's suggestions a year ago, now looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Aunt Carol's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with astonishment. Kaelen's parents, who had always worried about his unstable career, now looked at him with a mixture of awe and profound bewilderment. Their son, the perceived failure, had just bought the very company that defined their family's success. The irony was palpable, hanging heavy in the now truly silent air. The stage was indeed perfectly set, and the curtain had just dropped on their performance of Kaelen's shortcomings. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic tapestry of disbelief, denial, and desperate recalculations. Uncle Theron, the man who had always embodied unwavering control, collapsed into his chair, his hands fumbling at his collar as if the very air had become too restrictive. His face was a mask of utter devastation, his eyes fixed on the document Kaelen had placed before him. He muttered something incoherent, then stammered, This is a hostile takeover. Kaelen betrayed us. His voice cracked, losing all its previous booming authority. Betrayal, Uncle? Kaelen asked, his voice still calm, a quiet question rather than an accusation. Or merely a realignment? For years, Theron dismissed Kaelen's counsel, his understanding of the evolving market. Theron clung to outdated methods while the world shifted. Kaelen simply ensured that Theron Industries, the legacy Theron so cherishes, would have a chance to adapt, to survive, to thrive in the modern age. Something Kaelen knew it could not do under its current leadership. Cousin David, regaining some semblance of composure, albeit laced with a desperate tremor, leaned forward. Kaelen, what is Kaelen saying? Kaelen is going to fire everyone? Dismantle everything? There was a hint of fear in his voice, not just for the company but for his own position within it, a fear that mirrored the anxieties of many others at the table who relied on Theron Industries for their livelihoods. No, David, Kaelen replied, looking at him directly, his gaze firm but reassuring. Kaelen's intention is not to dismantle but to modernize, to innovate, to leverage the very digital widgets Theron once dismissed to make Theron Industries stronger than it has ever been. There will be changes, certainly. A shift in strategy, a reevaluation of priorities. But the goal is growth, not destruction. Kaelen will ensure the company retains its core strengths while shedding its weaknesses. His words, though reassuring in their content, were delivered with the cool precision of a surgeon, leaving no doubt about the absolute authority behind them. His parents, who had remained frozen in a state of shock, finally stirred. Kaelen's mother reached for his hand, her eyes glistening, a mixture of tears and pride. Kaelen, why didn't Kaelen tell us? Her voice was barely a whisper. Because, Mother, Kaelen explained softly, his gaze softening slightly for her, the secret was Kaelen's shield. Their dismissals, their underestimation, those were the conditions that allowed Kaelen to operate unnoticed. If Kaelen had revealed his true capabilities, his intentions, the walls would have gone up. Kaelen needed them to believe he was a harmless, misguided dreamer until the final piece was in place. He glanced at Uncle Theron, who was now being supported by a bewildered Aunt Carol, his face still etched with disbelief. It was necessary for the plan. The other relatives, initially stunned into silence, now began to speak in hushed, urgent tones. Some looked at Kaelen with a newfound respect, tinged with obvious regret for their past words. Others looked confused, trying to reconcile the failure they had always known with the formidable figure now before them. There were awkward apologies, tentative attempts at rapprochement as if they suddenly needed to curry favor. We always knew Kaelen was smart, Cousin Sarah offered, her voice weak, wringing her hands. We just misunderstood. Kaelen could see the gears turning in their minds, recalculating their assumptions about him, about success, about power. Kaelen simply nodded, accepting their words without judgment or triumph. He had no desire to gloat. His victory was not about humiliating them, but about reclaiming his narrative, about proving his vision. Theron's humiliation was a byproduct, not the primary objective. He was a symbol of the old ways, and his collapse was merely the inevitable consequence of his rigid adherence to them. He represented the very reason Kaelen had to take this drastic step. His world had just been irrevocably shaken, and he was struggling to find his footing in the new landscape Kaelen had created. In the days and weeks that followed, the news of the acquisition sent ripples through the industry and the family. Theron, unable to reconcile himself with the new reality, eventually stepped down from any remaining executive role, though Kaelen allowed him to retain a ceremonial position on the board, a gesture not of kindness, but of strategic pragmatism to avoid further public scandal. Kaelen began the monumental process of integrating new technologies, streamlining operations, and pivoting towards markets that Theron had stubbornly ignored. He introduced artificial intelligence to optimize supply chains, implemented robotic automation in the manufacturing process, and launched new product lines focused on sustainable materials and smart infrastructure, areas the old guard had deemed too risky. It was a monumental task, but one Kaelen approached with the same quiet determination that had defined his path, working long hours but feeling a profound sense of purpose. His parents, initially bewildered, slowly came to terms with the seismic shift. Their relationship with Kaelen, once strained by their anxieties about his career, began to heal. They no longer spoke of his unconventional choices with veiled concern, but with a burgeoning pride they hadn't allowed themselves before. His mother would often call, not to inquire about his real job anymore, but to simply express how proud she was. His father, seeing the tangible changes at Theron Industries, the growth, the innovation, finally understood. His cousins, those who truly cared, began to seek Kaelen's advice, not just about business, but about life, about navigating a world that demanded adaptability. The dynamics of family gatherings changed. The patronizing comments ceased entirely, replaced by a cautious respect, and sometimes even admiration. He wasn't just Kaelen, the odd one out. He was Kaelen, the visionary, the architect of their family's future. Kaelen found a profound sense of peace in the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had not only achieved his goals but had done so on his own terms, without sacrificing his principles or compromising his vision. He learned that true power isn't about inherited titles or public recognition. It's about the silent cultivation of skill, the strategic application of knowledge, and the unwavering belief in your own path, even when everyone around you doubts it. It's about building your own strength in the shadows, waiting for the precise moment to step into the light. Never underestimate the quiet ones, for it is often in their silence that the most powerful revolutions are meticulously planned. Your greatest strength can often be found in the blind spots of those who dismiss you. If you enjoyed Kaelen's journey of quiet triumph and strategic genius, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more immersive stories like this one. What do you think was Kaelen's most brilliant move? Have you ever felt underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments below.